Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, I would like to have a very, very interesting subject from one of our precious books, in a sense that it made history, and we would like to share. It's called The Law of Witchcraft, Sorcery, and the Illuminati in Uganda. Listen, the concept of witchcraft and its relationship with the law has a long and complex history, and it varies significantly across different cultures and time periods. And I'm going to give you some reasons because those of you who believe that witchcraft is an African thing, you will discover that's wrong. In terms of historical perceptions, witchcraft has actually often been associated with the belief that certain individuals possess what they call supernatural or even magical powers. So in many historical contexts, these powers were actually considered malevolent, and those accused of witchcraft were often viewed as dangerous and even persecuted. Now, there are sometimes what they call witch hunts or trials. So the highlight of witchcraft trials, for example, occurred during the early modern periods, particularly in Europe, with events like the so-called Salem witch trials, and even the US. And accused individuals face harsh legal proceedings and even often resulting in executions. Those of you who understand, I would try to explain. So in terms of legal evolution, over time, the perception of witchcraft and the law has actually evolved. So most modern legal systems no longer criminalize witchcraft or even magical practice in themselves. However, they may be related to laws concerning fraud or extortion, even other crimes where somebody may actually falsely claim to possess supernatural powers for financial gain or even manipulative purposes. But would like to make a case for it. Now, in terms of human rights and witchcraft accusations, in some parts of the world, particularly in Africa and parts of Asia, accusations of witchcraft continue to be serious issues, and these accusations actually lead to violence and even persecution. So human rights organizations and even legal reforms aim to address some of these problems. Now, in terms of freedom of religion and belief, many may believe certain legal systems protect freedom of religion and beliefs, which includes the right to practice one's spirituality or even belief system. It even involves some kind of witchcraft or magic. So, however, this protection is not absolute. It must be balanced with other legal considerations. So perhaps that's why we have the likes of Mama Fina in Uganda and the likes of different guys, but we'll get there. Now, in terms of contemporary witchcraft practices, some Western countries, in terms of modern witchcraft or even what they call neo-paganism, is actually practiced as a legitimate belief system, and it's even protected under laws concerning the freedom of religion. So in short, we can argue that the concept of witchcraft and the law has actually evolved significantly over time. While historical witch hunts and trials are even, are darker in terms of legal history, modern legal systems generally do not criminalize witchcraft itself. Instead, they actually focus on protecting individual rights and ensuring what they call religious freedoms, and even addressing any harmful associations that are associated with false claims of supernatural powers. So it is important to consider that specific regulations in terms of a cultural context when discussing witchcraft and the law. Under common law, for example, the legality of witchcraft has actually evolved significantly over the centuries. So one landmark case that actually sheds light on this issue is the trial of the pedo witches, which happened in 1612 in England. And the case is one of the most famous witchcraft trials in the English legal history. Now, in the trial of the pedo witches, 12 people from the area around Pedo Hill in Lancashire were actually accused of practicing witchcraft. Among them, the most known people were people like Elizabeth Demking, Elizabeth Device, and Anne Whistle, also known as the Old Chattocks. Now, the accusations were based on allegations of using witchcraft to harm others and even cause mischief. Now, the trial of pedo witches is also notable for several reasons, and some of the reasons are as follows. Number one, it was notable in terms of what they call legal procedures. The trial followed common law procedures over time, and the accused were actually given a formal legal process, which actually included presenting evidence and even examination of witnesses and even defense. So talk about witchcraft and the law. The verdict, the trial resulted in the conviction of the 10 in terms of those who were accused, and one of them was actually found not guilty. Now, this demonstrated that under common law at that time, witchcraft accusations could actually lead to convictions and even severe penalties, including execution. We will talk about a Ugandan scenario as well. Now, in terms of the role of evidence, the prosecution relied on the testimonies of the child witnesses, okay? which included statements of accused involvement in witchcraft. These statements were actually taken under questionable circumstances. Now, please understand that while the trial of the pedo, which has demonstrated the legal approach to witchcraft in the early 17th century, it's essential to emphasize that modern legal systems have actually drastically changed their stance on such matters. So today, witchcraft is itself may not be considered illegal or under certain common laws. With the exception of Uganda, we have the Witchcraft Act. Sometimes it's seen as a matter of religious or even spiritual beliefs and protected by principles of freedom of religion and belief. So the legal system today prioritizes individual rights, as I said, and no longer criminalizes witchcraft in certain jurisdictions in itself, save for the fact that those that do so, and probably that's the reason why we're making a case for it, would understand and try to lay down the ingredients and how to prosecute successfully. So, another important case in terms of legal history of witchcraft is the so-called Salem witch trials in colonial Massachusetts, which occurred in 1692. The Salem witch trials are some of the most infamous examples of witchcraft trials in the American history, where several people in the town of Salem village were actually accused of practicing witchcraft, leading to a series of trials and even executions. And I'm going to give some points that relate to this case. This is important for Africans because we have been so much accused of witchcraft, as if there's no witchcraft in Europe. I've just cited 2 cases, substantive cases. Now, in terms of Salem, the Salem witch trials began with accusations against a group of girls who claimed to be possessed by witches. Now, these accusations led to a chain of accusations against numerous individuals in the community. Now, as far as the legal procedures were concerned, the legal proceedings in Salem involved examinations, trials, and even interrogations. And accused individuals were actually subjected to intense questioning and even sometimes torture to extract confessions. Yeah. Now, as far as executions were concerned, during the trials, about 20 people, actually 19, were by hanging and 1 by pressing. They were, executed, while several others were actually imprisoned. And the accused faced severe consequences based on the belief that they were actually practicing what? Witchcraft. It's a very common thing even in Africa. Here, you get a Musezi, and you know what you do, you get Matoke and put behind their whatever, to signify the bizarre as far as that issue is concerned. Now, in terms of public opinion, the trials were generated significant public interest in terms of controversy, with a mix of religious, social, even political factors contributing to, the favor around the fever around the accusations, as it were. Now, the Salem witch trials serve as a historical reminder of the dangerousness in terms of mass hysteria. Now, the absence of due process, for example, and the use of unreliable evidence in legal proceedings. So this is the reason why we're making this episode. So this episode will illustrate the dangers of allowing superstition, for example, and fear to influence the legal system. We will talk about what they call the omniscient threat under witchcraft. Now, however, in modern times, the Salem trials, which have no legal bearing on witchcraft itself is not a crime in terms of contemporary legal systems, and individuals have a right to practice their beliefs freely, protected by the principles of religious freedom and human rights in terms of modern legal systems, which prioritize the rule of law, due process, and even the protection of individual rights, moving away from the harsh and even unjust treatment of those accused of witchcraft in the earlier centuries. But again, how do you deal with an omniscient threat? And that is the thing that I want us to argue as far as the law of witchcraft. Okay, sometimes we talked about it. I have the book here on soft copy called The Law of Witchcraft, Sorcery, and Illuminati. We have another case, the case of DPP versus Redin, which was a 1999 case in the UK, is perhaps a more recent example that touches on the subject of witchcraft and the law. Now, in this particular case, a woman named Jane Redin was actually convicted of child cruelty for subjugating her 2 young daughters to a series of bizarre and abusive rituals that she, claimed were based on her belief in witchcraft. Now, Redin argued that her actions were actually protected by her right, for freedom of religion under the European Convention on Human Rights. Perhaps, argumentatively, these are some of the things that we see with many of our religious leaders, call them pastors or whatever, who do some kind of things. Now, the court rejected Redin's argument, ruling that her actions went beyond the bounds of acceptable religious practices and constituted child cruelty. So the case highlighted the legal principles that the freedom to practice one's religion does not provide a blanket protection for harmful or even illegal actions, even if they were claimed to be part of the religious belief system. We will get there. We'll have an argument in terms of religious arguments in terms of the legality of them, some of the things they done, the likes of Chiwete and the like. Now, this case demonstrated the need to balance the right of religious freedom with the protection of individuals, especially vulnerable ones, from harm or even abuse. It even reaffirmed that under modern legal systems, acts associated with witchcraft or belief systems must comply with the laws and regulations, and the right in terms of religious freedoms has limitations when it comes to harmful or even criminal actions. Talk about what? Attorney General versus Nabagese. Do you remember? So, if we explore another case, Brown versus Board of Education, which is 1954 in the US, which doesn't directly concern witchcraft, but is important for understanding the broader concept of religious freedoms and the law. Yeah? In the case of Brown versus Board of Education, this was a landmark decision in the US Supreme Court that actually tackled racial segregation in public schools. So while it's not about witchcraft, it has relevance in terms of the broader issue of religious freedom because it is established a significant legal precedent. Okay? Now, the key takeaway from this case is the principle that the government must not endorse or even establish any particular religion and must ensure religious freedom for all. So this principle is enshrined in the First Amendment of the US Constitution, okay, from that argument, which basically prohibited the establishment of religion and protects the aspect of free exercise of religion. Okay, talk about our book, When Courts Do Religion. Find it again at lubogo.org or suigeneris.com. We make those propositions as well. Now, while again, as emphasized, the case doesn't directly involve witchcraft, it exemplifies the legal framework that ensures the protection of religious practices and even beliefs. So under this legal framework, individuals have a right to practice their religion or spiritual beliefs, whether they involve witchcraft, or Christianity, or Islam, or any other faith, without the fear of government interference or persecution. Not so. So in summary, Brown versus Board of Education demonstrate the importance of religious freedom as a fundamental principle in terms of legal systems and serves as a foundation for protecting the rights of individuals to practice their beliefs, including those related to witchcraft or any other religion. Yes and yes. We're proceeding. As I said, we're going to refer to my book, The Law of Witchcraft, Sorcery and Illuminati in Uganda, and I'm going to impress you with a number of interesting subjects. So, if you look at the case of the Children's Aid Society of the City of New York versus Lillian Hawkins, it was a 1981 case, will probably help us to understand further relationship between religious beliefs and the law. Yeah? In this case, Lillian Hawkins, a mother, refused to have her children vaccinated because her religious beliefs as a member of the Church of the Firstborn, a faith that opposes medical intervention and relies on prayer for healing. Yeah? Pastors, you listen to this? The Children's Aid Society took legal action to compel the vaccinations, citing the state's interest in protecting public health. Yeah? Does that sound familiar? So the US Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Children's Aid Society, emphasizing the state's compelling interest in safeguarding public health. The decision asserted that while religious beliefs are constitutionally protected, this protection is not absolute. Yeah, it's not what? Absolute. So when religion practices clash with important state interests such as public health and safety, the state has the authority to intervene. Reminds us of what? Article 42, Article 43, Article 44 of our very Constitution. Yeah? So the case is important because it highlights the legal principles that individual religious beliefs are subject to limitations when they conflict with the broader interests in terms of public welfare and society. Are we there? So this concept has a broader, implications in terms of the legal treatment of religious practices, including those related to witchcraft or any other belief system. So it shows that in modern legal system, religious freedom is actually respected, yes, but it is not an absolute right and must be balanced with other societal interests. So my friends, even as you engage in witchcraft, be careful lest you hold Mama Finn and company. Be careful. So in the context of witchcraft and other spiritual practices, this case underscores the importance of adhering law and regulation when religious beliefs and practices intersect with legal requirements and public welfare. And by the way, there are bad witches and good witches. If you use the word witchcraft. So I'm not saying that any of those I've mentioned is actually a bad witch. I just said witchcraft. So the offense of witchcraft, as understood historically and in some jurisdictions, involves the belief that a person practices harmful magic or engages in activities to harm others. And I'm not saying that people mentioned do harm. I'm just saying that the specific ingredients required to prove the offense of witchcraft can vary depending on legal systems and even jurisdiction. Now we're going to explore some illustrations in terms of common law elements for the proof related to the guy or the issue called what? Witchcraft. Okay. Let's look at the case of Ara versus Alice Kettler. It is a 1324 case in Iran. Alice Kettler was accused of witchcraft. Now, while the case predates modern legal principles, it offers insights into historical elements for the proof of what? Witchcraft. Proof number one, accusations and suspicion. The case began with accusation and suspicion of Alice Kettler practicing witchcraft. It's often started with complaints about individuals who actually betrayed or believed that they had actually been harmed or even bewitched. Number two, supernatural acts. To prove witchcraft, authorities sought evidence of supernatural acts such as curses, spells, charms, the mizingas of the sorts. Not so. Accused individuals were often alleged to have used these to cause harm. I will do ABCD. Those things that people get excited about. Yeah? Then this is what they call witness testimonies. Witness testimonies played a crucial role. People who believe that they actually been victims of witchcraft, who had knowledge of the accused activities, will actually testify. I'm going to give you examples, practical examples. You're going to be amazed. And then confessions and torture. In some cases, confessions were actually obtained, often under duress or even torture. Confessions were highly valued as evidence. Okay, those are all ingredients. Now, let's talk about another. The issue in terms of association with familiars. Yeah? Accused witches were actually sometimes believed to have familiars, or what they call spiritual entities, that assisted them in their witchcraft. Evidence of this was associations, was actually used also in terms of, the trials. Now, another aspect in terms of ingredient was magical tools. The presence of magical tools, or even what they call paraphernalia, okay, such as cordons, or even wands, or even herbs. It was often considered in terms of evidence for purposes of proving witchcraft. Okay. Number 7, public opinion, social climate, and public, opinion played a significant role. In the case of Alice Kettler, her wealth, her social status contributed to accusations and suspicions against her. So, listen, my friend, it is important that contemporary legal systems do not criminalize witchcraft itself. Instead, that they should focus on actions related to witchcraft that may involve fraud, extortion, and even harm to others. Maybe that's the reason why these Bazungus gave us this Witchcraft Act. So, as if they were helping us, but they were doing it themselves. So these legal principles, in terms of evidence, have actually evolved since the history of trials, with a strong emphasis in terms of due process, but also with presumption of innocence, as it were, and also reliable evidence. Remember that. Now, the case of Alice Kettler illustrates the historical elements of proof of witchcraft, as I said, but it is essential to recognize that modern legal systems do not use these criteria, as they prioritize in terms of fairness, in terms of justice, in terms of protection of individual rights, as I just told you. Yeah, I'm going to give you interesting discussions as well. We're going to go through my book, The Law of Witchcraft, so you can know what we're talking about. So while these cases specifically focus on witchcraft, they are relatively rare in modern legal systems. So several cases touch on related themes of religion, for example, spiritual practices and their legal implications. So these cases provide insights on how the law addresses beliefs and these practices, and how they are considered in terms of unconventional methods. Okay? I'm going to give you a couple of other cases so we comprehend what we're talking about. There's a case called Church of Lukumi Babala Aye versus the city of Haila, which is a 1993 case. Now, this case was also in the United States. It involves what they call Santeria religion, which includes animal sacrifices as a religious practice. The city of Haila, Florida, had actually passed ordinances restricting these rituals. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the city's ordinance was actually unconstitutional because they targeted the so-called Santeria religion specifically, violating the First Amendment protection of religious freedom. Yeah? That's one case. I'm going to give you another case. The case of what they call Larisisi and others versus Greece. It is a 1998 case. In this European Court of Human Rights case, the issue revolved around the Greek government refusal to register a spiritual union of Yazidis. Yeah? So as a religious group, the court held that the Greek government had actually violated the applicant's right in terms of freedom of thought, conscience, and religion under the European Convention on Human Rights. Yeah? So this case is kind of highlight the legal principles that protect, as I say, religious freedoms, even when certain practices may actually be unconventional or misunderstood by the broader society. Yeah? So if you see some of your guys doing certain things I'm not going to mention, then you probably ask yourself. Yeah? So they show the modern legal system prioritize protecting individual rights and accommodating diverse religious, spiritual groups within the bound of public order and safety. I know some people, there's a lady who was a preacher who actually prayed for someone, and the guy fell, only to realize that they had some kind of surgery earlier, and they had a problem with their head. So she was sued. Whether or not that was supernatural, that's another question or debate. So the legal principles, as I said, they uphold, particularly those related to religious freedom, have relevance in terms of case law today. So others, in terms of spiritual practices, we have to intersect that with the law. So the concept of an omniscient threat in the context of witchcraft and the law typically basically refers to a belief that a person accused of witchcraft possesses what they call super knowledge or supernatural knowledge or powers that can actually be used to harm others. Accusations of an omniscient threat are often based on the belief that a witch can actually foresee future events, knows the secrets of individuals, or can use magical means to harm or even manipulate others. These allegations have actually been central to many historical witch trials and even accusations. So to support this argument, I will provide some examples from the Salem witch trials, particularly that case of the Salem witch trials, which is 1692. Think about that. We don't even talk about African witchcraft. We talk about European and what? White witchcraft, to use that word. So during the Salem witchcraft trials in Massachusetts, several individuals were actually accused of being omniscient threats due to their alleged supernatural powers. For instance, Tituba, a slave from the Caribbean, was actually accused of using her knowledge of voodoo, and folk magic to tell the future and even manipulate events. So people in the community believed that she had knowledge of secret matters and was using this knowledge for harmful purposes. This accusation contributed to her being implicated in the witch trials. Now, the idea of an omniscient threat, usually where a person is actually accused of having some supernatural knowledge or powers that could actually be used to harm others, was a common element in many witchcraft trials, as I just told you. So these allegations often led to fear and suspicion in communities and even contributed to the persecution of individuals accused of what? Of witchcraft. How many times do you see people running away from villages because they are, quote unquote, suspected to be witches or even being dispersed because of that? Okay, now it's important to note that, as I said, modern legal systems may not recognize supernatural powers or even knowledge as a basis for criminal prosecution. But the legal approach of witchcraft has actually evolved, as I told you significantly, emphasizing individual rights, the burden of proof, and due processes. So allegations as far as omniscient threats are seen in historical witchcraft trials are not considered valid ground for legal action in terms of contemporary legal systems. I'm going to give you another case again which talks about the context of witchcraft accusations, and this could be the case called the Pendle witches, which is again 1612. The Pendle witches, which is a 1612 case. The trial of the Pendle witches in Lancashire, England, is another example of the concept of an omniscient threat, in which where witchcraft accusations did occur. In this case, several individuals, including Elizabeth Device, were actually accused of practicing witchcraft. So accusations were based on the belief that these accused individuals possessed supernatural knowledge and used this to harm others. Now, one of the accused, who was Elizabeth Device, was believed to have made predictions and had knowledge of secret matters that she allegedly acquired through witchcraft. Now, this supposed ability to foresee events and have knowledge beyond the ordinary was considered a threat to the community. Now, pastors and the likes, I'm not victimizing you and I'm not calling you witches. I'm only saying you have this ability to tell the future in terms of whatever means you're using. Some people can argue that that's an omniscient threat. So the concept of an omniscient threat was actually used to justify the persecution and the execution of those accused of witchcraft during the trial, and other witch trials in history. So accusations of supernatural knowledge or even powers often played a significant role in terms of fear and hysteria surrounding what? Witchcraft. There used to be a pastor who used to say, is it what, movies or something like that? Some of those aspects. Again, it is essential to emphasize, as I said, that these cases may not represent principles of modern legal systems in terms of contemporary legal framework to prioritize the protection of individuals. So the burden of proof and due process, they do not recognize the concept of an omniscient threat. So as the legitimate basis for criminal prosecution, accusations for witchcraft are actually considered to be valid grounds in terms of legal actions in modern legal systems. So be careful, those of you. There's a thin line between your so-called supernatural and witchcraft. If you're not careful, there's culpability in terms of criminal liability. So while there is limited modern legal cases to express this, we can explore certain related cases in terms of religion, in terms of belief, in terms of the law. I'll give an example. An example of what they call the Employment Division versus Smith. That's another case. That happened in 1990. So although not a witchcraft case, the U.S. Supreme Court, in terms of Employment Division versus Smith, is or a landmark case in terms of the concept of religious freedoms and the law. The case basically involved two members of the Native American church who were, fired from their jobs for using what they call a peyote, what they call hallucinations, or what they call hallucinogenic substances as part of their religious rituals. How many times we see holy water and holy bread? They were denied unemployment benefits, and even they sued, claiming that their First Amendment right to free exercise of religion was actually violated. Yeah? I hope I don't get in trouble with the many pastors, because I think when I turn into these things, people begin to say, oh my goodness, I know something about it. So the Supreme Court ruled against the employees, stating that the First Amendment does not actually guarantee the right to use illegal drugs as part of their religious rituals. Okay, the decision emphasized that the government can actually impose generally applicable laws, even if they incidentally burden religious practices. So as long as the laws are not specifically targeting those religious practices. Yeah? Now, this particular case obviously highlights the legal principles that religious freedom is not absolute and can be limited by generally applicable laws. And that's the point you must understand. So it has a broad application for cases involving unconventional religious or even spiritual practices, including those related to witchcraft. So while the case doesn't involve witchcraft, it actually underscores the importance of adhering to laws and regulations. And even when religious beliefs are actually involved, and how the law balances religious freedom and the public policy and safety is something that we need to comprehend. Yeah? Now, for contemporary witchcraft or any other religious practices, the law generally respects and protects religious freedom, as I told you, within the boundaries of legal regulations and public interest. In terms of African case that may be related to witchcraft, they could be limited because the African way of doing our thing, many people don't usually go to court. Yeah? It's one way of finding remedies of sorts. Yeah? It's an answer to almost all problems. Yeah? Yeah? But there's one case that comes to mind, the State versus Maragia. It was a Kenyan case. The State versus Maragia, it was an 1885 case. In this case, 3 individuals, including a woman named Maragia, were accused of practicing witchcraft and even causing harm to the members of their community. And, they were charged under the Witchcraft Act, which we do have here as well, which was in place at that time. Now, the Act prohibited witchcraft-related practices and made it an offense to claim or even to imply that a person had actually the power of witchcraft. Yeah? Now, the accused individuals argued that they were not witches and that had actually been falsely accused. Their defense was based on denying any involvement in witchcraft activities. I'm not very sure if so many people can agree and say, yeah, me, I'm actually a witch. Yeah? So maybe a little bit obvious. But the court found that, the court found the accused guilty and they were actually sentenced to various terms of imprisonment. Yeah? And the case basically illustrates the legal framework in some African countries where witchcraft accusation can actually lead to legal proceedings. We have one in Uganda. Soon I'm going to cite it. So the laws that addressing witchcraft accusation and practices, as I said, vary from nation to nation, and many African countries have laws that actually address these harmful practices related to witchcraft, while some others may actually have more specific anti-witchcraft legislations. Okay? So it's important, my friends, to recognize that witchcraft laws in Africa can actually be controversial, and they may infringe on individual rights, as we shall see in one particular case, and can actually be used to justify persecution or even harm. And therefore, modern legal systems in Africa have actually increasingly moved towards protecting human rights and individual freedoms while seeking to address harmful practices related to witchcraft, although non-discriminatory and their fair legal means, as it were. Yes? Okay. In terms of a possible layout of, if you want to understand what probably the law of witchcraft would entail for purposes of intellectual debate or argument, you may pay attention to specific things that I'm going to mention, because call it an intellectual philosophical discourse. Yeah, in terms of understanding first of all the historical perspectives and also relating that with contemporary legal treatment of witchcraft accusations, in terms of protection of religious freedoms and the impact of cultural beliefs in terms of the legal outcomes, as it were. It's a big issue in Africa, in particular in Uganda. I'm having discussions with some students, and one particular one, impressed it upon me when they went to some area of this country, and they were doing their work, and then a guy comes and tells them, "You have offended me," because I think he was promoting safe except for parental, issues in terms of maternal guidance. And for them, they're not interested in that particular area. They're working for the Red Cross, I think. And then the guy tells them, "You will see me." And guess what? In the night, the guy slept, but when he woke up in the morning, he was extremely tired. He said, "I woke up and I was extremely tired. I couldn't understand why I was so tired." And said, "Lo and behold, I looked at my legs and I saw dust on my legs." He said, "Even that very day, I actually slept. The next day, I continued." He said, then the guy comes back 3 days down the road and said, "By the way, how did you like your night?" I'm told the people in Wuyaga and Bugagaisi can actually make you dig in the night without you knowing that you're digging. Which reminds me of a particular individual actually also who came to me and told me, "You know what, I have this money that I'm receiving." I was demanding money on behalf of my client from him. And he told me, just don't worry, the money is going to come. And so we waited. First day he told me, "You know what, to buy time for your client, I'm going to give you 5 million as an appreciation." I came back after a week, nothing. He says, "No, I'm increasing it to 10. Just buy me more time." I said, 10 million in a month. I'm going to do that. Came back after a month, nothing. Then later, he told me, "You know what, things went bad." I said, "What happened?" He said, "The truth of the matter is that the money that I got from your client, I got hold of it, put it in a basket, poured water in it, and then milk, took it aside of Osawara and burnt it. And after I burnt it, something came out of the water and told me, you're going to buy Mogag." And man, and this is a graduate, graduate, for all intents and from a substantive university in this country. I was so amazed that later, when I told him, I tried to punch some doubts in him by telling him, "I work face it." Later, when we went, he told me, "Let me go to the cupboard where the guy told me the money is going to come." Only switch there was zero money. There's another woman actually also went because she wanted to become rich. These are stories I hear from people. Okay, and the woman told me, "You know what? I went to this other witch doctor. The witch doctor told me, but Judge Abagambi, let's have a sexual intercourse if you want the money." But I was so desperate, and the woman said, "I accepted." And then the guy pulls out a low-cost kind of suitcase, and there was new notes of 50,000. He said, "I counted the money, it was about 50 million. He gave it to me. He told me, go home, but don't open it after 3 days. Reaching there, after 3 days, I was tempted because I was excited. Then on the second day, only to open, there was a big cobra that jumped out of the case. Witchcraft. How do you address those issues? Then there's another case that I will write you of a woman actually who went and actually attacked the co-wife. Can you imagine? Attacked the co-wife and killed the co-wife. Why? Because the doctor told them, the witch doctor told them that every time this co-wife, the husband comes back, the sexual organs don't function when the guy comes to my home. But when he goes to the other person's home, they function. So the woman was filled with vengeance and anger and said, "No, this is, and I'm gonna kill the what? the other woman." This is serious business, my friend. So witchcraft in this country is a reality, and therefore you're dealing with omniscience. What redress are you gonna give? What redress are you gonna give with these guys? How are you gonna help them to address this issue? Even me, one time I was in a law firm seated, and the client comes and with another lady. So I was the lady's son who was actually our client, but the guy was seated with him. So I told him, "But you have come with this other guy. What's the issue?" "I know the now. Let him sit there, And so the guy was sitting there, was actually chewing something, chewing, and I'm like, "What is he chewing?" Meanwhile, I'm listening to the lady giving me the stories, and all of a sudden, I saw the entire office beginning to revolve around, like a circle. I began feeling extremely dizzy. And when I walk out of the office, I get normal. When I enter the room where the guy is, I feel like, man, I thought the guy is in Nawalabi. I saw the guy walked away, sanity prevailed in the room. My friend, witchcraft is a reality. So some of you guys who are joking, I know you know these stories. Yeah? There's a particular media guy who keeps telling you that for him, he doesn't even waste time going to court. He sends those bazookas and they come. That one time they sent a bazooka and the magistrate were presiding over a matter. And what do you call those black ones? A crow or whatever came, entered the room, picked off the guy's hood and ran with it outside the window, and the judge says, case dismissed. So you guys, these things are real. witchcraft can become serious issue. Now, when I talk about witchcraft, many people are like, now, Isaac, what's wrong with you? Beware in terms of the law. No, an omniscient threat, substantively omniscient. We have these things in our law. I just cited cases for you, yeah, where even the whites have actually, engaged in these things. So it's very, very important for us to understand how do we navigate through as lawyers, but also as students of law, but also as individuals, and the aspects, where is the thin line when we're talking about issues of witchcraft. Witchcraft is a reality, my friends, yeah? And it has taken people's money, it has taken toll on people's lives. Some people have been killed, some people have been sacrificed for no good reason, yeah? Witchcraft, and in my argument, in some of these things, especially with gender-related issues, yeah, without being offensive, almost every gender is biased in terms of witchcraft. The women go there because of certain things. The men go there because of certain things. Without mentioning, when we are young, remember, in those days there used to be people who have circles around towns, yeah? And they attract quite a number of people. And when you go there, they give you small sticks, and you say, when you find a girl you love, go hit the car stick on the girl, and you tell them to vangovere. That was something like that. And with all innocence, we were vulnerable to such beliefs, and we believed them. And when we tried some of the things, they never worked. Thank God, they never worked. But then there are those who say they work. This other guy I told you about told me, my friend, I went to Wiaga, is it Wiaga, one of those areas. He said they brought my grandmother who died about 20 years ago. I saw my grandmother digging. So I'm talking about reality. Yeah. So now, whether or not you could argue in terms of the devil or spirituality, that's your question of debate. And I'm not disputing what Holy Scriptures may say about some of the things. And I'm not even advocating for the strength of it. I'm just saying I'm creating a knowledge for you in terms of understanding and comprehending that these are realities, and we have to sometimes comprehend them as intellectuals. Yeah, and we have to argue them in terms of emerging legal issues. There was an issue, for example, some of you probably heard of a guy called Spoonbender. Spoonbender was a guy, when he looks at a spoon like this, it would bend, right in front, with intensity. Yeah? And Spoonbender was an Israelite, I think. He gave an example one time when they were supposed to be signing agreement for America. He was hired by the American government when they were having nuclear non-provision, I think, agreements with North Korea and the likes. And they were hired to go and sit with the diplomats. And their duty was to simply sit on this side of the bench while the North Koreans were on the other side and look at their eyes, penetrate into their minds, and cause them to accept and sign, the agreement that was going to be provided before them. He gave that evidence. Some of you probably watched him. He even talked about how he went into Michael Jackson's brain and was trying to find out whether Michael Jackson was a pedophile, stuff like that. So these are things that we are talking about, and we cannot run away from them. Yeah, there's another guy. Of course, there are those who are fakes and pretend and stuff like that. And I'm not making an advocacy for those who are true in any way. I'm just arguing the law of witchcraft as it says. But I'm mindful of those aspects. But thank God that for those of you who believe in the Scriptures, the Holy Scripture says there is no witchcraft against Israel. Not so. And by Israel, I'm talking about those who believe in the descendants of Abraham in terms of belief, not literally the country as it were. So witchcraft and the law becomes extremely important, and it exposes us in terms of understanding, as I say, how to to react and how to behave and how to procure some of these aspects in terms of legal perspectives. And how do you deal with cultural beliefs and superstitions, and the fear that these things may have been imposed on them. I know lawyers who will never handle cases that have to do with the suspicions in terms of those concepts. There's another case that UNRA versus Haji something, I think there was a case, it eludes my mind, where the judicial officer, the guy said, I'm not going to remove this tree so to hell with your road, and the judge said, please remove your tree, and because the guy argued that his God was in that tree, and said, please remove your tree and take your God somewhere else. So all these things become important for you to comprehend and understand in terms of understanding the aspects in terms of witchcraft, in terms of supernatural, in terms of religious contextualization of things that have to do with the supernatural and the like. As I said, we will go through some of the things that we've talked about in our books here as I begin to navigate through, as I said, the law of witchcraft, sorcery, and Illuminati. Illuminati will be another day, but for purposes of just understanding a few things, I would like to point out a few things from my book in terms of what I wrote and what we may want to comprehend under the law of witchcraft. The concept of witchcraft, for example, the etymology in terms of definitions, the roots of witchcraft, as I said, in terms of inquisitions into its incidents, the history of witchcraft, the regulations of witchcraft social practices in terms of our belief system, social and then mythology, the Mohammedan perspective, the biblical perspective, white witches in Britain and Europe, in terms of that, and then numerous perspectives on witchcraft in terms of feminism and media, and then traditional witchcraft and Satanism, human sacrifice, cannibalism, historical and religious perspective, and then the aspect of criminalization of witchcraft in terms of the actual issues of witchcraft, and the conduct must be voluntary, for example, witch murder and menswear, reference in terms of witchcraft in terms of Uganda, and then what they call extenuating circumstances in the law of witchcraft, defenses available, in terms of witchcraft, how witches got their names and reputation, recognition of witch doctors and the likes. All these things we argue them, the impropriety in terms of traditional witchcraft attitudes, the failure for witchcraft beliefs and witchcraft as a domain, in terms of science, the functionality of witches and wizards. All these we argue, and then demystifying what they call the idiotic myth of witchcraft and the impact of supernatural power in African communities as well. The Ugandan perspective in terms of witchcraft, and then aspects to do with, of course, Illuminati, which we probably handle on another day so that we comprehend a little bit. But as I said, this book, by the way, is dedicated to the Lord God Most High, my refuge and strength. I bear witness that the Lord is God and there is no other but God Almighty. And so there is no witchcraft against Israel. So it is not to stigmatize you or to cause you to panic, but to give you, as I said, that understanding of what witchcraft and the law would entail. So in terms of about the book has actually been a marked increase. The argument is that there's been a marked increase in terms of issues connected with witchcraft in the media, for example, in terms of Uganda. And the stories have actually ranged from exhuming dead bodies or even body parts in terms of human sacrifices, or even where victims are actually killed and their genital, for example, cut off, and even blood drained from their bodies, and people banished from homes even after being accused of bewitching others. So one wonders where witchcraft practices are on the increase, and whether there is a prominence, and this is because of the link in terms of the criminal acts, in terms of the murder that it attracts as well. So many reasons, for example, have been advanced for practicing witchcraft, such as wealth, such as jobs, such as power, such as love. There's an institution where one of the individuals whose name I won't mention told me, every morning I walk into that office, I have to look under my table to make sure there is no cut off head of a chicken somewhere. Incredible. These are highly placed institutions. So another person told me the times of campaigns where beautiful white women would sit on motorbikes and the border guy was riding. The guy told me when he reached somewhere, I was about to cross and there was jam and the lights had stopped. And then only to look back, this other beautiful woman had disappeared from the bike, and people said, "What have you guys about that to do?" And so we saw, but we don't know why she disappeared. So these things are reality. And so when you talk about this, my friend, don't think we're joking. So the concept of witchcraft, whether harmful or not, had to be argued in terms of cultural ideology. So we have to have a means of explaining human misfortunes, for example, rather than sometimes blaming it on others, or even on aspect of supernatural entity known as particular individuals perhaps who have that power. So the argument in terms of that, the lingering mystery of Illuminati, for example, and sorcery also is argued in this book, and we'll probably have a more substantive look at another time. And then the aspect of the Witchcraft Act of 1957 for the case of Uganda, where the law provided for the prevention of witchcraft and the punishment of people who were practicing it. The practice of witchcraft was not actually confined to Africa only, as I just argued, but also in terms of England, as it were, in terms of, for example, there was one they called the Fraudulent Mediums Act of 1951, which repealed the Witchcraft Act of 1735. So English law punished persons in terms of who fraudulently, for example, purported to act as spiritualists in terms of mediums or in terms of exchanges. Yeah, and then one significant case for the case of Uganda was constitutional case number 2 of 1997 between Salvatore Abuki, Richard Abuga, and the Attorney General. The petition was successful. Constitutional Court actually declared it null in the sense that the sections of interpretation were actually void for being vague and ambiguous and did not meet the requirements of the Constitution, and that as a result, the petition was not allowed to afford, to be afforded a fair trial, as the offense was actually unknown. So, following the constitutional declaration, the exclusion order and banishment as a form of punishment was actually deleted from the law. And the need for an explicit definition of the offense of witchcraft actually underscored. So currently, 14 years later, Witchcraft Act still provides for punishment for practicing witchcraft, ranging from imprisonment for a period not exceeding 5 years up to life imprisonment. For example, Section 2 of the Witchcraft Act partly states that any person who directly or indirectly threatens another with death by witchcraft or any other supernatural means commits an offense and is liable to conviction to imprisonment for life. So the question is whether or not the mechanism can actually, one can use to discern or even ascertain a bona fide spirit in terms of worship or bona fide manufacture can actually, supply or even, for example, giving medicinal harms. What is what is the argument there? What is the bearing there? How do you address that in terms of that? Now, also when you look at a book written by Arabian Sidman, not Sidman, but Sidman, Arabi Sidman. It was called Witch Murder and Menswear, a Problem of Society Under Change. It was a 1965 book. At page 52, he writes that the peculiar nature of witchcraft is that it presents an overhanging, omniscient threat. Time in such a case does not cool the passion. It actually inflames it. So, and it's true. In peculiar nature of witchcraft is that it presents an overhanging, omnipresent threat. Time in such a case does not cool the passion, it simply does what? Inflames it. So when you know that someone is doing certain things about you, it doesn't cool, it actually makes you more desperate. And you feel like, man, what am I gonna do? I feel like jumping its neck or something. So the use of supernatural or magical powers, as I said, is a prominent phenomenon since antiquity up to today. In our later days, successful businessmen have actually been accused of amassing illicit wealth, for example, through the practice of witchcraft and magic, and even sometimes politicians. I will not mention there. But you know what I'm talking about. So imagine such a scene where, for example, a woman sitting, in a room holding it with a long handle and perhaps naked, freely floating in space, directing the balloon towards you. All those issues, some of those contemplations. How about finding people? This idea of going to the lake or to the water, like call it. How about certain things coming out of the water? All of these things are questions of debate, but as I said, we need to look at it in terms of the contextualization of the law and what does the law say about some of these things. So, as I said, please look out for that book. I'm going to give you another case in terms of the case of Uganda. There's a case called Uganda versus Danatio Kombe, which is session number 536 of 1967. Monthly bulletin number 136 of 1967, where it was argued that the accused killed a woman after being advised by a witch doctor that the same woman had actually charmed his penis so that it could not function when he slept with his wife. Think about that. Now this happened innocently, or I do whatever reason that, but I just gave you citation of that effect. So the things I'm talking about and there's a lot of case law, by the way. Those of you who think I'm talking about it, there's a lot. I was amazed at people who come to me and say, why are you talking about that aspect? Why are you talking about those things? Are you ignorant? Guys, witchcraft from the law is actually even done at PhD levels in incredible law schools, by the way. So these are not stories. This is serious business that we're talking about. So as I said, I've just taken you into a little bit of what our books would entail and what we need perhaps to comprehend and what we need to understand. So those of you who may be interested in terms of understanding, please look out for that book, Witchcraft and the Law, or Witchcraft, Illuminati, Sorcery in Uganda, and you have a better understanding of some of the things. In terms of other cases, I told you about Laris versus Greece, where the Human Rights, Court of Human Rights involved the Greek government refusal to register the spiritual union of the Yazidis as a religious group, highlighting the importance of human rights and even freedoms in case related to unconventional belief systems. So it is important, as I say, that we have a clear understanding in terms of the implications of human rights, in terms of of the accusations that may come with it, but also more importantly, in terms of the right human rights instruments that we need to apply or even invoke when it comes to the protection of rights and the dignity of individuals accused of witchcraft, as it were. Yeah. If there's something else that maybe comes to mind, would probably talk about it in our next volume. But for purposes of this dispensation, in terms of understanding perhaps the etymology and definitions, as I said, the word witchcraft itself is more than 1,000 years old. Combined, it's called witch and craft to get the compound of witchcraft. So witch was originally a masculine word in terms of Old English, when it was sometimes spelled as Wicca, W-I-C-C-A, or Wicca, W-Y-C-C-A. So folk, in terms of folk entomologists, they attribute the phrase craft to wise. So the English term wit wise, wisdom, in terms of having a Germanic root, or what they call weight. So in terms of also Indo-European root, in terms of weed or widow. So in English language, as I say, the Germanic language, women are typically referred to as witches. And I'm not saying that women are witches, I'm just giving you substantive discussion in terms of the etymology of what this comes from. So the word can actually be translated in terms of what they call branca in Portuguese, or brunja in Spanish, or sorcière from in terms of in French, and stranger in Italian and Neo-Latin languages. So the word bruxo, as far as the Portuguese are concerned, or brujo, as far as the Spanish are concerned, or sorcerer in terms of the French are concerned, or Suigeneris, correspondingly have what they call a masculine infected counterparts, which with the same etymological root in terms of these different languages. And some people look at it in terms of wizard, which is less frequently used, or warlock, which are the terms in terms of what they call the anglophones, which prefer to translate it in terms of English. So witches, according to anthropological terminology, differ from sorcerers as far as they are concerned, and in their opinion, they don't employ physical implements or even actions to cast spells. Instead, their so-called maleficium is thought to stem from some unreal or even inner equality. So one may not even be aware that they're actually witches, or even sorcerers, or even wizards for that purpose. So those are things that you may want to understand when you look at some of these dispensations that we're trying to make in terms of the argument for witchcraft and the law. In terms of roots of witchcraft, when you look at the Inquisition into its incidents, the Oxford Dictionary, for example, defines sorcery, for example, as the use of magic, and the Webster Dictionary, which is defined as one who practices the black art, or perhaps magic, or one regarded as possessing supernatural, even magical powers by compact with an evil spirit, especially with the devil, and sorcerers or even sorceries. So witchcraft means rituals and practices that actually incorporate beliefs in magic, and that are actually associated with what they call neo-pagan traditions and religion practices. So these are some of the things that you may want to argue and understand when you look at some of the things that we have comprehended and talked about as far as the law of witchcraft is concerned in Uganda. Now, as I said, witchcraft can be argued from any perspective. You could even find people who are very well educated. It's not people who are non-educated or illiterates who actually engage in witchcraft, but you will find it even with people even who are highly educated, and you may fail to understand exactly why they're comprehending some of these issues. So it tells you the reason why this thing must be taken serious in terms of understanding and comprehending the legal aspects that have to do, or that we may employ when we are actually dealing with it. I'm just trying to scan through the book so I can see if there's anything that may come to mind that I may have to share on this YouTube, bearing in mind that I cannot be able to speak about everything. But as I say, please look out for that, and then it will give you a lot of discussions in terms of the history, in terms of some of the substantive cases that we have been able to argue, but even in terms of how it began, like the argument in terms of 1487, the notorious case, the so-called notorious cases of the Malleus Maleficarum, which was published inaugurating the period of witch hunts in the early modern Europe, and then all those aspects. So my argument here, as I said, is to have a comprehensive understanding without being biased in terms of witchcraft accusations, in terms of legal challenges, and in terms of responses to anything that may be required of us to comprehend the complexities when it comes to the proof of the ingredients, when it comes to imcrimination of the offense, when it comes to defenses perhaps. And when you look at our book, it will give you everything that you may need in as far as that particular issue is concerned. So once again, please take liberty of visiting our website. Please take liberty of comprehending some of the information in some of the major bookstores of this country, but also in the world over, including Amazon, Smashword, Dicto to Draft, Lambert, and the likes. So you have no excuse, my friends. This is an opportunity for you to learn and comprehend. In terms of modern cases, as far as I said, we have quite a number, substantive of them. I mentioned some of those, even by giving the bearing of some of those that actually happened some time ago. So ladies and gentlemen, as I said, this is a good opportunity for you to learn, and thank you for your great attention. My name is Isaac Christopher Lubogo at Suigeneris here, where we try to demystify the law for you. God bless you, and thank you for your attention.